The great hall of the Velthury Collective stretched for kilometers in every direction, its crystalline walls humming with the power of 1,000 suns. And within this space, the most powerful beings in the known galaxy had gathered to discuss the fate of a species they considered little more than insects. High, Arbiter Kethzan stood at the center of the chamber. His serpentine body coiled upon the speaking platform as 12 holographic representatives flickered around him like ghosts made of light. And each one represented a species that had conquered star systems when humanity still lived in caves. "We have completed our assessment of the species known as humans," Kethzan announced, his voice echoing through the hall with the weight of absolute authority. "And I bring you our findings." The representatives leaned forward with interest, though some already wore expressions of boredom because they had heard similar reports about countless primitive species. Before this one, Akithan waved a clawed hand in the center of the chamber filled with images of Earth, of human colonies scattered across 47 star systems, of their ships and stations, and the billions of soft-bodied creatures that called themselves the inheritors of their small corner of space. They emerged from their birth world only 3 centuries ago. Kethzan continued, "which makes them younger than the children of our children. And in the grand scale of galactic civilization, they are barely newborns taking their first steps." Laughter rippled through the chamber, a sound like breaking glass and grinding stone as 12 different species expressed their amusement in 12 different ways. Their territory is modest, and their fleet numbers less than 2,000 vessels of any significant size, the High Arbiter reported, and their weapons technology appears to be a crude imitation of designs we abandoned as obsolete 10,000 years ago. Representative Morvex of the Krellin Dominion raised one of his forearms in question, and his insectoid face clicked with curiosity as he spoke. "If they are so primitive, then why do we waste the Council's time discussing them at all?" he demanded, "when there are more pressing matters requiring our attention." Kethzan's eyes narrowed and a cold smile spread across his reptilian features as he prepared to deliver the true purpose of this gathering, because these humans have done something that no primitive species has ever dared to do before, he said, and they have refused to submit to collective governance when we offered them the honor of becoming a protected species under our rule. Shocked silence fell over the chamber, because every species in the galaxy knew that refusing the collective's protection was the same as signing your own death warrant. And yet these humans had apparently done exactly that. They demanded equal standing among elder races. Kethzan continued with disbelief still evident in his voice. And when our ambassador explained that such a thing was impossible for a species so young and weak, their leader had the audacity to suggest that perhaps it was time for the collective to evolve its thinking. Outrage exploded through the chamber as representatives shouted and hissed and clicked their fury at such unprecedented insult. Furthermore, Kethzan raised his voice above the chaos. "The humans control 17 resource-rich systems that contain materials essential to our expansion plans, and they have made it clear that they will not share these resources willingly." The anger in the chamber shifted into something colder and more calculating as the assembled powers began to understand where this was heading. "I propose that we teach these humans the price of defiance," Kethzan declared, "and I propose that we do so with such overwhelming force that every other species in the galaxy will remember for the next million years what happens when you challenge the natural order." The vote was unanimous and swift, because no representative dared to appear weak in the face of such obvious provocation. And within moments, the greatest military mobilization in galactic history began across 12 homeworlds and thousands of colonies. The war machines of the collective stirred to life as factories that had been dormant for centuries roared back into production, and shipyards began assembling vessels of war at a pace that defied comprehension. 18,000 warships would form the invasion armada, each one crewed by soldiers from species that had perfected the art of conquest over millennia. And together they would carry enough firepower to crack planets and extinguish stars. Admiral Sor Naval of the Valkyrie received command of this unprecedented force, and he accepted the honor with the confidence of a warrior who had never known defeat in 300 years of service. "We will give them one chance to surrender," he announced to his fleet commanders. "And when they refuse because their pride will not allow them to accept reality, we will show them what true power looks like." The declaration of war was broadcast across all frequencies and every language that humanity had ever spoken. And its message was simple and direct. The Valkyrie Collective hereby declares the human species to be in violation of galactic law and subject to immediate pacification. The transmission stated, "And all human worlds will submit to collective authority within 30 standard rotations or face complete and total annihilation." On Earth and across every human colony, the message was received with a mixture of fear and quiet determination as billions of people looked up at the stars and wondered if they were about to witness the end of everything they had building. The halls of the United Human Federation. The leaders gathered to discuss their response, and President Chun looked at her advisors with eyes that held neither panic nor despair, but something that the Valkyrie would never have expected. She smiled. "Contact Prometheus Station," she ordered, "and tell Dr. Tanaka that it is time to wake up our inheritance." Her advisors nodded and hurried to carry out her orders, because they alone knew the secret that humanity had kept hidden from the galaxy for over 200 years. The collective had made their calculations based on what they could see on the ships and weapons and colonies that humanity had allowed them to observe. But they had never thought to ask the most important question of all. They had never wondered how a species that had been burning fossil fuels just 3 centuries ago had somehow mastered interstellar travel within a single generation. And they had never questioned why human technology seemed to work on principles that no collective scientist could fully understand. The answer to that question would have changed everything. But by the time the collective learned the truth, it would already be far too late. The war had begun, and humanity was about to show the galaxy what happened when you declared war on the inheritors of something ancient beyond measure. Deep beneath the frozen surface of a moon that officially did not exist on any star chart, Teisuke Tanaka walked through corridors that had been carved from solid rock by machines that humanity had not built and could not fully understand. Prometheus Station was the most closely guarded secret in all of human history, and fewer than 100 people in the entire Federation knew of its existence. But what it contained had shaped the destiny of the human race from the moment it was first discovered. Tanaka had spent 30 years of her life studying the artifact at the station's heart. And in all that time, she had never stopped feeling a sense of awe. Whenever she entered its presence, the interface waited for her at the bottom of the facility. And calling it a machine was like calling the sun a campfire, because it existed in ways that human science could barely describe, let alone explain. It was a sphere of absolute darkness surrounded by rings of light that moved in patterns no mathematician had ever been able to predict. And it hummed with energy that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the boundaries of normal space. "Good morning, Dr. Tanaka," said the interface in a voice that was neither male nor female and seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The Council has received the declaration of war," Tanaka replied as she approached the central platform, "and President Chun has authorized me to begin activation protocols." The interface was silent for a moment, and its rings of light shifted through colors that human eyes had no names for. "You understand what this means," it said, And there was something in his voice that might have been concern or might have been anticipation. Because once certain systems are awakened, they cannot easily be put back to sleep. Tanaka nodded because she understood better than anyone the weight of what she was about to do 258 years ago. A mining expedition on Mars had discovered something buried beneath the red planet's surface. Something that had been waiting there for longer than the solar system had existed. And that discovery had changed everything. The interface had been left behind by beings that humanity had come to call the architects. Though that name was just a placeholder for something far beyond human comprehension. And these beings had created the first life in the universe and spread it across countless galaxies before vanishing into dimensions that no longer touched normal space. Why they had left the interface on Mars and why it had been designed to respond to human contact were questions that Tanaka had spent her entire career trying to answer, and she was no closer to understanding now than she had been 3 decades ago. What she did know was that the interface had given humanity gifts beyond measure. The technology that had allowed humans to travel faster than light had come from the interface, and so had the energy systems that powered their cities, and the materials that built their ships, and 1,000 other innovations that had transformed a primitive species into a spacefaring civilization in just a few generations. But the interface had always made clear that what it had given was only a fraction of what it contained. And there were protocols and systems locked away inside it that humanity had been warned never to access unless their survival was at stake. Defensive Protocol 7, Tanaka said, and her voice was steady even though her heart was racing. Authorization Code Prometheus. The interface pulsed once with light that seemed to reach into Tanaka's very soul. And for a moment she felt something vast and ancient looking back at her through the darkness at its center. Authorization accepted, the interface replied. And defensive systems are now coming online across all human territories. Across the 47 systems of human space, something extraordinary began to happen as devices that had been dormant since their installation suddenly stirred to life on every colony. World there were structures that humans had built following blueprints provided by the interface. And these structures had appeared to be nothing more than power stations and communication arrays and research facilities. But now their true purpose was being revealed. Beneath their ordinary exteriors lay technology that operated on principles so advanced that even Tanaka could not fully explain how it worked. And this technology was now activating for the first time in human history. Ships that had seemed to be ordinary vessels of the Federation fleet began to change as hull plates shifted and reconfigured themselves into patterns that should have been geometrically impossible. And weapon systems that had been hidden behind false panels powered up with energy signatures that registered on no known scale. But the awakening did not stop at the borders of human space. In the darkness between galaxies, in places so remote that light itself had not yet reached them since the dawn of creation, something else was responding to the signal from Prometheus Station. The architects had not merely given humanity gifts and then disappeared, because they had also left behind watchers, guardians created to protect the seeds they had planted across the cosmos. And these guardians had been sleeping for 4 billion years, waiting for a moment exactly like this one. Tanaka felt their awakening like a wave of pressure inside her mind. And for just a moment she glimpsed something so vast and so powerful that her brain could not process what it was seeing before the vision faded and left her gasping on the platform. What was that? She whispered. The Keepers. I've heard the call, the interface replied. And they are coming. On the bridge of her flagship, Admiral Chun Wei received reports from across human space as the transformation of their defenses continued. And she watched with wonder as her own ship changed around her into something that looked less like a vessel of war and more like a piece of abstract art given physical form. All ships report. Ready, her tactical officer announced. And whatever these new systems are, they show power levels that are off every chart we have. Chun nodded and turned to look out at the stars where somewhere in the distance, the collective armada was already on its way. Send a message to the Veltari, she ordered, and tell them that we do not want this war, but that we are prepared to defend ourselves. The message went out across the void and was received by Admiral Sornavel aboard his command ship. And he laughed when he read it, because to him it was nothing more than the desperate bluster of a doomed species. He did not know that the message was not a threat but a genuine offer of peace. And he did not know that by rejecting it, he was sealing the fate of the greatest military force the galaxy had ever assembled. The collective continued its advance, and the awakening continued to spread. And somewhere in the dark between stars, ancient eyes opened for the first time in eons as the Keepers began their long journey toward a war they had been created to end. Kepler's Gate was the name humans had given to the great junction point where 7 different hyperspace lanes converged at the edge of their core territories. And it was here that the first true battle of the war would be fought. Admiral Chen Wei stood on the bridge of her transformed flagship and watched as 3,000 collective warships emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of angry insects descending upon prey they believed to be helpless. She had 42 ships under her command by every calculation that normal military science could produce. Her small fleet should have been nothing more than a speed bump in the path of the collective vanguard, a minor inconvenience to be brushed aside before the real conquest began. But Chum had seen what her ships had become since the awakening, and she knew that normal calculations no longer applied. Admiral, the enemy fleet is hailing us, her communications officer reported. Put it through. Chum replied. The face of Commander Sornavel appeared on her view screen, and his reptilian features were twisted into an expression of contempt mixed with something that might have been amusement. Human Admiral, he said, I am giving you one final opportunity to surrender your forces and spare your crew the destruction that awaits them. Because I am told that despite your obvious foolishness, your species is capable of being useful as laborers and servants. Chung felt a flash of anger at his words, but she kept her expression calm and her voice steady. Commander, I'm going to make you the same offer, she replied. Because you can turn your fleet around right now and go home, and this war can end before anyone else has to die. Sornavel laughed, and it was an ugly sound full of certainty and arrogance. Your primitive vessels cannot hope to stand against even a fraction of my force, he declared. And this conversation is over. The transmission ended and Chun turned to face her crew. And she saw fear in some of their eyes, but also trust and determination. All ships engage defensive protocol, she ordered, and show them what we really are. Across her small fleet the command was received and acted upon, and the collective sensors which had been tracking 42 unremarkable human vessels suddenly began screaming warnings that their operators had never been trained to interpret. The human ships were changing hull. Plating that had appeared to be standard military alloys unfolded like the petals of flowers blooming in fast motion. And beneath them lay surfaces that seemed to shift and move in ways that defied the laws of physics. The ships themselves seemed to grow larger without actually increasing in mass. And their shapes became things of impossible geometry that collective computers could not render properly on their screens. Weapon ports that had registered as standard plasma arrays opened to reveal something else entirely. Something that glowed with a light that seemed to come from outside normal space. What is happening? Sornavel demanded as alarms blared across his bridge. What are they doing? His tactical officer had no answer because nothing in their database matched what they were seeing. And the confidence that had filled the collective fleet moments ago was rapidly being replaced by confusion and the first stirrings of fear. All ships open fire, Sornavel commanded. Destroy them now. 3,000 warships unleashed their weapons in a barrage that should have reduced the human fleet to vapor in seconds. And the space between the two forces filled with enough destructive energy to crack moons and boil oceans. Energy reached the human ships and simply vanished. It did not splash against shields or overwhelm defenses or do any of the things that weapon fire was supposed to do, because it just ceased to exist, as if it had never been, as if the very concept of the attack had been erased from reality. Impossible, Sornavel whispered Admiral. Chun gave her next order with a voice that carried no joy or triumph, because she understood that what was about to happen was a tragedy, even if it was a necessary one. Return fire. The human weapons discharged, and what emerged from them was not plasma or missiles or any form of energy that collective science had ever documented. It was nothing. Beams of absolute emptiness lanced across the void, and wherever they touched collective ships, those ships simply stopped existing. And there was no explosion and no debris and no dying screams across communication channels, because there was nothing left to explode or float or scream. The beam swept through the collective formation like invisible scythes through wheat, and ship after ship after ship was simply erased from the universe as if they had never been built or crewed or sent to fight this war. Sornavel watched in horror as his mighty vanguard was annihilated around him, and he tried to give orders, but his voice would not work and his hands would not move, because his mind could not accept what his eyes were showing him. In 11 minutes, it was over. 3,000 warships carrying millions of crew members had been reduced to nothing, and the human fleet had not taken a single casualty because not a single collective weapon had managed to touch them. The silence that followed was absolute. Admiral Chun opened a channel to broadcast across all collective frequencies, and her voice was tired and sad when she spoke. We did not want this, she said, and we still do not want it. So please turn back and let this end here, because we have no desire to kill anyone else. Her message reached the main body of the collective armada, which had been following the vanguard at a distance. And it reached the Council of 12, who had been watching the battle through long-range sensors with absolute confidence that victory was assured. High Arbiter Kefzen stared at the data with eyes that could not believe what they were seeing. And for a long moment, he said nothing as the other representatives waited for his response. Continue the attack, he finally commanded. And send everything we have, because they cannot have unlimited power, and we will overwhelm them through sheer numbers. It was the wrong decision, but it was the only decision that his pride and his history and his understanding of the universe would allow him to make. The collective armada resumed its advance. And somewhere in the dark between galaxies, the keepers drew closer with every passing moment. First battle was over, but the war had only just begun. High Arbiter Kefzan refused to believe the reports that continued to flood into the council chamber, and he refused to accept that 3,000 of his finest warships had been destroyed in minutes by a force that should not have been able to scratch their paint. There must be an explanation, he insisted as he paced before the assembled representatives, because no species develops technology of this magnitude in 3 centuries, and no species hides such power while pretending to be weak. Representative Morvex of the Krullan Dominion spoke with a voice that trembled slightly despite his efforts to appear calm. Perhaps we should consider the human offer of peace, he suggested, because whatever weapon they possess is clearly beyond anything we have encountered before. Nitrogen monoxide, Kefzen roared, because if we retreat now, then every primitive species in the galaxy will see that the collective can be defied, and our entire order will collapse within a generation. The other representatives exchanged uneasy glances, but none of them dared to contradict the High Arbiter directly. And so the order stood, and the remaining 15,000 warships of the Collective Armada continued their advance into human space. They attacked from every direction at once, because surely the humans could not defend all their borders simultaneously. And surely their mysterious weapon had limits that could be found and exploited. For 3 days, the attacks continued, and for 3 days, the results were the same. Every fleet that engaged human defenders was destroyed completely, and every weapon that the Collective possessed proved useless against the transformed human ships. And the death toll climbed into the billions as vessel after vessel was erased from existence. On the 4th day, something changed. Sensors across the galaxy detected energy signatures emerging from locations where nothing should have existed. From the cores of dead stars and the hearts of black holes, and from points in empty space that were so far from anything that light would take millions of years to reach them. The architects had built more than the interface throughout the cosmos. They had constructed facilities and machines and things that had no names in any language. And they had hidden these creations in places where a younger species would never think to look. And they had left them sleeping until they were needed. Now they were waking up. The first keeper emerged from a fold in space near the Collective homeworld. And it was a thing of terrible beauty that defied comprehension. It was not a ship in any sense that the word could convey, because it was a geometric form that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the standard 4, and its surface was covered in patterns that moved and shifted in ways that caused pain to look upon directly. It was the size of a small moon. More keepers emerged throughout Collective space. Dozens and then hundreds of them appearing from hidden places where they had waited for 4 billion years. And each one was different, and each one was vast beyond measure. The Collective fleet tried to engage them and learned immediately that this was a mistake beyond calculation. The keepers did not fight the way ships fought, because they did not fire weapons or deploy troops or do any of the things that military forces were supposed to do. They simply reached out with energies that predated the current universe, and they unmade whatever they touched. Ships were not destroyed, but were instead reduced to their component atoms, and those atoms were scattered across light years in the span of heartbeats. And there was no defense against this power because it operated on principles that collective science could not even begin to understand. In 6 hours, the greatest military force in galactic history ceased to exist. 15,000 warships, billions of crew members, the pride and power of 12 spacefaring species. All of it was gone without a trace. On the collective homeworld, Kethzen watched through his viewport as a keeper hung in orbit above his city, its impossible form blocking out the stars like a geometric god, passing judgment on the mortals below. He waited for death, but death did not come. Instead, a message arrived through channels that should not have been able to carry transmissions. And the message was from the human President Chun, who spoke with a voice that held no anger and no triumph. "This is what we were trying to warn you about," she said. "And this is what we were trying to prevent by asking you to turn back. Because we did not build these things, and we did not fully control them." Kethzen found his voice at last, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "What are they?" he asked. "They are the guardians left behind by the beings who created all life in this universe," the president replied, "and they were designed to protect that life from threats that would destroy it. And when you declared war on humanity, you triggered ancient protocols that brought them out of their long sleep. Why did they stop?" Kethzen demanded. "Because surely if they wanted to destroy us, they could have done so already." There was a pause before the president responded. "Because we asked them to," she said, "and because unlike you, we do not believe that the answer to every problem is annihilation." Kethzen sank into his chair as the full weight of what had happened began to settle upon him. The collective had ruled the galaxy through fear and power for 60,000 years. And in less than a week, all of that had been reduced to nothing by a species they had dismissed as primitive insects. But more than the military defeat, it was the final words of the human president that cut deepest into his soul. They had the power to destroy the collective utterly, and they had chosen not to use it. And that simple act of mercy was more devastating to Kethzen's understanding of the universe than any weapon could ever be. 1 month after the end of the war, Ambassador Sarah Okonkwo stood in the great hall of the Velthary Collective, the same chamber where the decision to destroy humanity had been made with such arrogant confidence just weeks before. The crystalline walls still hummed with power, but the atmosphere was entirely different now, because the 12 holographic representatives who flickered around the speaking platform no longer radiated authority and contempt, and instead their postures spoke of fear and uncertainty and desperate hope. High Arbiter Kethzen was there as well, though he no longer stood on the central platform but instead waited among the other representatives like an equal rather than a supreme ruler, and his serpentine body was coiled tight with tension as he waited to hear what fate the humans had decided for his people. Through the transparent dome of the chamber ceiling, one of the keepers was visible, its vast geometric form hanging motionless against the stars, like a reminder of what humanity could unleash if they chose to do so. "I know what you are expecting," Okonkwo began, and her voice was calm and measured as she addressed the assembled leaders of 12 species. "Because you are expecting us to do what you would have done if our positions were reversed." She paused and let her gaze move across the gathered representatives. "You are expecting demands for tribute and territory," she continued, "and you are expecting us to carve up your worlds among ourselves and reduce your peoples to servants and slaves. Because that is what has always happened in the history of this galaxy when one power defeats another." Kethzen lowered his head because he could not deny the truth of her words. "But we are not going to do any of those things," Okonkwo said, "because we are not you." Confusion rippled through the assembly as representatives exchanged glances and whispered among themselves in their various languages. The beings who created the interface chose humanity for a reason, Okonkwo explained, and we did not understand that reason for a long time, because we could not imagine why ancient powers beyond our comprehension would select a young and flawed species like us to inherit their gifts. She walked forward until she stood at the very center of the chamber where Kethzen had once pronounced the death sentence of her species. "But I think I understand now," she said, "because the architects watched this galaxy for eons before they departed. And they saw empire after empire rise to power through conquest and cruelty. And they saw each of those empires eventually fall and take millions of innocent lives with them." Representative Morvex raised one of his forearms. "If you are not here to conquer us, then why are you here at all?" he asked, and his voice held genuine curiosity beneath the fear. "I am here to offer you something that has never existed in the history of the galaxy," Okonkwo replied. "And I am here to offer you equality." Stunned silence fell over the chamber. "We want to build something new," the ambassador continued, "and we want to create a federation where every species and every world and every voice is equal regardless of age or power or technology, because we believe that is the only way to break the cycle of violence that has defined galactic history. You could simply force us to submit," Kethzen said, and his voice was hollow with exhaustion and something that might have been shame. "Because you have the power to make us do whatever you want." "Yes, we could," Okonkwo agreed, "and that is exactly the point. Because the architects did not give us this power so that we could become another empire built on domination. And they gave it to us because they believed we might be the first species with the wisdom not to use it." She gestured toward the keeper visible through the dome above. "These guardians will return to their sleep," she said, "and our ships will return to their normal forms. And the weapons that destroyed your fleets will be locked away again until they are needed to defend against genuine threats to all life. You would give up such power voluntarily? Morvex asked with disbelief evident in every word. We are not giving it up. Okonkwo clarified, because it will still be there if we need it. But we are choosing not to use it to control others, because we believe there is a better way. She turned in a slow circle to address all the representatives directly. You can refuse this offer, she said. And you can go back to your worlds and try to rebuild your fleets and prepare for another war. But we both know how that will end. Or you can take a chance on something different. What guarantee do we have that you will keep your word? Kethsan demanded. Because history teaches that those with power always eventually use it against the weak. Okonkwo smiled, and it was a sad smile full of understanding. You have no guarantee, she admitted. Except the fact that we could have destroyed you already, and we did not. And we could enslave you right now, and we are choosing not to. And every day that passes without us becoming the tyrants you fear will be another day of proof that we mean what we say. The representatives deliberated for hours, while Okonkwo waited patiently. And the debates were fierce as 12 species tried to comprehend a concept that went against everything they had ever known about how the galaxy worked. In the end, it was Kefsin himself who spoke first. The Valkyrie, accept your offer, he said, and his voice was quiet but steady, because you have shown us that our understanding of strength and power was incomplete. And perhaps it is time for us to learn a new way. One by one, the other representatives added their voices until all 12 species had agreed to join the new federation. As Okonkwo left the chamber, she paused at the entrance and looked back at the beings who had tried to exterminate her species just weeks ago. This will not be easy, she said, because there will be disagreements and conflicts and moments when the old ways will seem simpler. But if we can make this work, then we will have created something that the architects themselves were never able to achieve. What is that? Kethsin asked. A galaxy where species do not have to fear each other. Okonkwo replied, and where the measure of a civilization is not how much it can destroy, but how much it can build. She walked out into the light of an alien sun and above her the keeper pulsed once with colors that seemed almost warm before it folded itself back into the hidden dimensions from which it had come. Humanity had inherited the keys to godhood, and they had chosen to remain human. In the end, that choice would prove to be their greatest gift to the galaxy.